Welcome to another session of our Venture and Capital interview series. Today, we're joined by the famous, just joking, he's not really famous, but I'll start off with that, Mr. Eugene Fedorchenko. Hope I'm getting his name right. A very famous Ukrainian, he was telling me earlier. He's a BD partner of Fastlane, who also, obviously, we do a lot of work with. And also, he's the founder of his own passion project, which is called IntFinite, I want to get that right, which is really sort of, I suppose, design sort of thinking around the organizational chart structure. Now, today's session is really around, I suppose, helping companies to think through that organizational change part, because effectively, whether you're an investor watching this podcast or whether you're a founder watching the podcast, effectively, you know that your business has to go through change. And when we were having conversations with Eugene about this, we were talking about effectively the three different areas of change that companies go through when they're progressing their business. And typically companies find it when they cross those different milestones of first going through sort of 10 to 15 team members, then as they go through sort of 25 team members, and then like us, when they're going through that process of when they've got sort of 50 team members, there's change that goes with all those different components. And we're having some fantastic chats around, I suppose, the area of managing that change, but then what are the actual steps involved? So, Eugene, it's a long introduction, but welcome, my friend.
Thanks a lot, Steve. That's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully we can have great conversation and discussion around some details of what you just outlined and bring some value to our audience.
And just to note, some of these areas we've actually worked on directly with each other as part of this, which is also what sort of brings up this sort of as a discussion. So the first part, when I sort of mentioned this to you, the first part, if you want to break it down to the three simplest areas, that if a company's going through change, whether it be growth they're going through or whether they're looking to make a transition in their business, some call it pivot, but pivot sounds like an aggressive word, like some things have gone wrong, but typically companies do have to go through transitions. And I was going to say, even companies that are like ours, that have been around for some time, every 5 years, they need to go through a transition to remain relevant to whoever their clients are that they deal with. And because business markets are always changing. So we effectively summarized it to three areas. That first area is the strategy area, and that sort of aligns with sort of org chart, structure, vision, mission, etc. So the actual strategy. The second part is the people, and then the third part is technical. And when we broke down these three, we're thinking about, okay, well, these are the areas that effectively can cause the most challenges for businesses. So Eugene, for you, you've obviously worked with a lot of tech companies. You've seen them go through all sorts of different stages. You've worked from companies that are, got 0 to 10 staff to, from what I understand, 1,000 sort of plus staff. What is, when you're sort of walking into a business and you know that they're going through, that they're looking to go through this sort of transformation, what are the first things that you're looking at? What are the first questions that you're typically asking to understand where they're at?
Well, thanks for this question. It's a very profound one. Anyway, I believe that, as you mentioned, strategy is basically, in a way, a huge long-term plan on execution of the purpose of the company, of its value prop, of its, whether it's service or product or hybrid. These days, we don't differentiate between those normally. And if you look at the historical examples of companies like Nintendo, right, they started in the end of 19th century, which is a long time ago from now. And they started with the purpose of, we want to entertain people in a certain way. Back then, the only technology available for that was playing cards, right? And now we know where Nintendo stands. But when you look at purpose versus execution, the practical stuff around it, is always connected with and linked with the stakeholders and people who are involved in decision making, at whatever level, whether in stealth mode or the by formal position in the C-suite level. You really need to look into this group of people who are involved in decision making and ask them a question, why? So I try to narrow it down altogether, right? So why are you doing that? Why you've been in the market? Why you've started this thing in the first place? This is where I would probably start from my end.
And after they give you that answer, so let's say they explain to you, here is, here is the why behind the business. Then for you, I suppose, how are you then assessing things related to whether it be their current org chart structure, understanding how the different departments actually in the business, or really, I suppose, trying to understand, firstly, is this the right, is what they've communicated? Because I suppose the next step is you have to hear from different team members, right? You have to understand. So then how are you trying to understand if there's alignment between what they're saying at the head level to what they're saying at the team level?
Well, that's absolutely right spot there. So the next step is to actually understand whether at the C-suite level or decision-making level, there is alignment first there at this level of people, if they understand why are they doing that, and if the drivers to do that are healthy, in a way that, of course, we're all living in a tangible world. There should be some incentives and financial things to drive that. But my sort of take on that, any organization, even small, like larger than 2 or 3 people, that's already bigger than one founder. So the organization is an entity and energy around that business endeavor that's already larger than one person, which means that it should exist beyond the lifetime of the foundational ideas, because the healthy reason to create any business or any organization is to actually deliver value to society or business stakeholders around it. And of course, on the way to that, earn additional value on top, get ROI, but fuel shouldn't exist for the purpose of fuel. And then it should fuel everyone's involved, and it will, if that's a healthy value prop, if that's a healthy purpose. So normally I'm seeing a lot of misalignment at the very top level of organization, whether it's one founder, and the misalignment actually may happen in his own head, which is normal because we're all human, or there might be a very huge board of directors, supervisory board, a very complex structure of of governance and management. And especially in these cases, in the very heavy load enterprise kind of customers, you would see that. So normally I would focus there and stop there. And definitely if there is an unhealthy managerial or leadership style and process there, you would not even look into the mid-level and beyond, because you would understand that it's misaligned at several levels. But if we talk about small organizations like yours or similar, 30, 50 people or less, then sometimes it's pretty reasonable to go downwards and see how the execution team, the managerial team, or the junior team underneath would see that alignment and purpose. And it's pretty straightforward. You can figure it out. Probably there is an element of psychology or behavioral stuff there, but you can figure out whether people are just working for a salary or incentives, or they're just making up their CV in a small organization, or they actually believe in what's going on. And in that case, if they believe, there might be a case that they see, look, I believe in the purpose of and the value prop, but I don't believe with the way, I don't trust the way we execute it, or I actually doubt the way we run our processes. That's fine. This is easier one. You can fix it and you can communicate around the organization. But it's usually easier to be an advisor, consultant like myself, because from the outside you can see those things, and when you're involved in this pendulum, you can normally drown into BAU. Yeah, that's the approach.
So for my own journey, I think that when we were around the sort of 10 to sort of 20 team members mark, I realized that one of my biggest flaws was that I would have conversations with people. Like I think as a founder and as an executive, you're spending 80 to 90% of your time thinking about things which don't currently exist, right? And the rest is solving problems, right? And a lot of the time you're thinking about solving problems, like even the things which don't exist, you're effectively still problem solving in some way. And so that's one component. And the second part is you're also communicating what's next. Like, I don't know many founders that communicate what's right now, because you're always sort of so focused on what's going forward. So I found that in my poor communication, or my one of my biggest flaws was that I would be communicating to everyone externally that I'd have conversations with about the direction of the business, where we're going, what our plans are. And then when I would have a chat internally, I realized that the team actually had no idea and were unaware of it. And it was just and I think that's one of the hardest parts to you mentioned that before, is that disconnect, is that in the actual strategy is like, it's not about mentioning it once and then thinking that people are across it, right? Because that was my mistake. It's how do you actually embed it into the entire culture of the actual business, where that each department is then taking up its own initiatives, or at least, you can see that your communication is coming back to you in the forms of ideas or suggestions, actions, correct?
Yeah, look, it's a challenging thing. On one hand, in situation when you have 30 to 50 people emerging company or scale up, there is normally one or two or max three co-founders who are driving that, and they, by human design, they have a capacity. So you can consume and process and make an output of it, this extent of information and decision making, right? Which is normal. And then including analyzing and assessing the alignment of the team in execution wing, right? So that's one, and the other one is psychological. Or awareness thing, when the founder or the C-suite level team, they understand, look, we reached the level of our capacity. We need to make structural org design or dynamics decisions about how we distribute that capacity in a way that it doesn't harm the organization.
So, and it's a good question. It's a good point you bring up, right? Because this is an internal debate that I'll have, or that I'll sort of challenge the team with, is because you mentioned that if people can feel overwhelmed or they feel like there's a lot of work on, often the nature was then, okay, we need to hire another person to help. I think the biggest transformation over the last 5 years is that the role that software plays in our lives and helps create efficiency in so many different ways. And I think the challenge that we've got to have for ourselves, for our team members, and just in general, is that let's not solve friction points or capacity issues inside the team with, let's bring on another team member. How do we actually solve it with process improvement, number one, and then potentially software that could simplify our lives in different areas? And that sort of then brings up the topic then of problem solving. What is the typical process? So when you're going into a company and you see that there is a challenge in your, I said, you've got that helicopter view, you're spotting challenge, how do you help navigate their thinking process to solve those problems?
Well, coming back to basics, we're just, in my case, I would ask the question, why? In case of if we narrow down to the person or function or role in the organization, we'll ask, why does it exist in the first place? Can it be replaced by some software or automation solution? And again, why would you do that? So you would apply some techniques and methods around process innovation, like you said, right? And then in some cases, organization grew up with core competency A, whether it's, I don't know, sales or tech or marketing, and then it evolved. And you go back to the first point, why did it start in the first place? And if it sees that this is the good time for it to be more of a product SaaS company, which requires different functionality, different people to be involved, of course, there is a gap in transformation, but it does answer a question why, because there is a purpose in the first place. In case of WI, that the purpose is to make capital raise and start up the life journey easier and more full with education and sort of features around it, right? So if you keep asking the same basic question, then you'll be able to work with the org chart and org design, and when you roll it out, it will be dynamics. Do these elements work well together? And probably if they don't, in some places you need to embed some bits and pieces of automation or specific software for collaboration. But again, you're going through first level of strategy and purpose, second level of execution, people execution, and then you sort of nail it down at the tools level, toolkit level, and software and automation or whatever decision you may have there is nothing more than a tool. Recent years challenged like all of us in terms of let's go more into digital, let's go more into tools and automation. But let's not forget about the harmony in any organization. It's still end-to-end from human to human. What's in between, that's the magic sauce, right?
Well, I think the human to human part's important because all those different process automation, effectively, the ultimate question, you said you go back to why, right? And there's an element of that why, which is what is most valuable to the customer, right? Now, when you're a product creator, you've got your perceptions about what's so valuable, and you're biased in your own beliefs about what's valuable about what you do. Ultimately, customers can have a completely different perception about what value they're expecting from you and what's a nice to have versus what's a must to have. And that's also can then start to shape the thinking of, well, if we can improve processes in a certain way or change the way we do things to make it more efficient, or we can have software or use automations or whatever it may be, that can then free up. It's not to remove team members, it's then how do we free up team members that do more to allow more valuable items for our customers?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's actually about increasing the quality of decision making in those who are involved in that in the organization, more strategizing, more be aware about customer perception shifting because they're constantly shifting. Like even this podcast, we'll talk about some things now. We're gonna change our minds in bits and pieces and move on from here. So, and you really need to grasp and tackle that customer perception there. And there is a state, like a good quote about it. If you're entering the unknown in business, you should have a flexible plan and a strong vision, right? So if you have a strong vision and purpose, you'll be adaptable and changeable along the way. But by applying technology and tools and automation behind, polishing processes, you will increase the quality of the decision-making team and execution team, which will be more open to deal with customer shifting perceptions rather than mundane or admin or very heavy stuff that is routine in its essence, right?
Interesting. And so once again, just going back to your, I suppose your work that you've done with companies, after you've sort of understood the why behind a business, after you've looked at, where do you see the key areas that companies typically fail as they're going? Because I said growth is all about change. I said my favorite quote is the maximum growth occurs on the border. Maximum growth occurs on the border of chaos and order. Yeah. Right. And I love that quote. It's pretty much exactly what you just said, where it's like the maximum, it said that the vision is strong, but there's flexible plans, right? Like that aligns with that perfectly. What are some key things that you would identify in a company where things aren't, where there isn't an alignment, among, like, what do you identify as there is an alignment? I know you've touched on it before. And then where do you see when companies are actually tapping into alignment with their teams?
Well, probably I'm going to repeat a lot of people who've been talking about it recently, but this is all about communication. And actually, I would go brave here, being vulnerable about what you're actually aiming for and what are your drivers, and revealing the actual intentions, which is very, a specific, a trait relevant to very resilient people. And these are the people you would like to have in this decision-making body that is enabled by technology and good processes, right? So you really need to filter out or work and improve each other in that regard. But the way I saw that communication is one of those. I recently had one of the cases where there are a couple of organizations involved in multi-jurisdictional decision making and trust, by the way, and the group of people were entrusted with specific decision making here in Australia, and the very next day after this happened, the decision that was made it didn't sort of fly, which means that there is no alignment, there is little trust, which is fine. You need to immediately talk about it, not leave it for the later day, because it will just go in avalanche effect. You're gonna have it at the level of banks or investment banks or huge software corporations where things just break if there is no communication, no trust, and people are not opening up to each other at the very high level, C-suite level. They're driven not by the purpose, but by either just profits or tangible stuff, without thinking about the long term, right? Without thinking about the long term. And you see that these investigations around IPOs or similar, where we just need to achieve this tactical thing just to make specific group of people happy. So when this happens, no technology can help. I mean, definitely technology in investigations and fraud prevention and similar would help, but these are working for the other people who are lying. We need to find those who are lying to themselves. So it's very much, again, comes back to human and strategy aspect. Why are we doing this? And whether humans are aligned in this top decision-making group around communication, and why are we doing this? Communication is probably the center of it, but there are some adjacent elements.
Yeah, the nicest part that I saw for us in our work that we were doing with you was that, because the biggest transformation that we had to go through as a company was a lot, and we're obviously still going through it. And for me, I knew it was a multi-year sort of transition for us where initially, you go back sort of 3 to 4 years ago, we were known for running events, globally. And then we built our own platform, and really we knew that as a business, we want to be more product-led in how we actually operate. And also we want to be more community-driven in how we actually add value to an ecosystem perspective. But there is also a strong demand from clients that we work with for the promotional side in an area it's one of the hardest to operate in. So it's a massive challenge to undertake, but I knew that for the long-term perspective, it's massively important for us as a business, and also more importantly, for for basically fulfilling the vision and the mission from the company side. In saying that, the parts which I really started to see it was when team members were consistently, week on week, day in, day out, sort of bringing up suggestions to improve different areas of the business. And that for me was one of the nicest things to see, because I've gone for a long time of being like coming up with the ideas and so forth. Whereas having that, as I said, the trust that your team can also bring the solutions and then execute on the solutions was a nice experience to see.
Absolutely. And all this we heard a lot of messages around how technology brought us together during pandemic, and it made a lot for communication, but it made a lot process and technical wise for communication, but still decisions are made based on trust, and there is a lot out there, things like blockchain, they're trying to solve that problem technically, but while we still have this scale end-to-end, human to human, there will be always psychological and behavioral and customer perception and service provider perception areas, which can only be solved within decision making and trust and communication between people. And if it's aligned, then we can create the whole star of series of blockchains and technologies out there, which will just amplify that. we used to this term that technology is neutral, and I actually, on my own, I believed in that for several years. But there are examples proving different point, that there are some technologies and platforms out there global that are designed to harness whatever data for some not clearest purposes, right? And so, and it's driven by people. You can construct whatever technology tank you like for that. Sorry for my Ukrainian analogy. Yeah, you promised some jokes. I just did one.
So in a funny story, so Eugene's partner is Russian. So we caught up last week, and the first thing I started doing was kicking off Ukrainian and Russian jokes to start with. So yeah, that's always
and the
fun.
good thing is, if we go back to the topic on organizational level and process level, that's the good example how Ukrainians and Russians can get along together. But if you scale it, you've probably been seeing that sometimes when you scale it in a bad shape, it may have some flaws, right? But hopefully we can mitigate those.
And just as a final sort of question for this session, what do you see over the next sort of 5 years? What do you see would be some of the biggest challenges that CEOs are going to face when it comes to their org charts? And I said every single day we're hearing about news as far as it's harder to attract talent. The cost of talent's actually gone up. And obviously being in Australia, we've got less people coming out to Australia at the moment. Like when you sort of just from your high level perspective over the next 5 years, what do you see the challenges that will face CEOs?
Well, that's the point where we started with you, Steve. So if you look at the strategy and all the underlying elements, and then for any strategy, people are the crucial element to actually implement it and validate it as an MVP. And then if you have it validated, you may apply this or that technology to scale it up, right? So I'm seeing huge challenges in the area of the second point. There will be brilliant people, as always. This planet brings a lot of brilliant people. There will be a lot of brilliant ideas and value props, but you'll have a lot of challenges about execution on the talent, human side of things. We've heard about the episodes or cases of so-called global resignation or global apathy to any corporate work. So there is a huge amount of people, especially in the US and EU, who are pulling out from standard jobs or standard engagements and thinking, basically pivoting around what I'm going to do. So bringing that purpose, long term, and strategy in one place and communicating it to those people would be as you call it in old terms, competitive advantage. I don't like to call it competitive advantage. I'm gonna call it the muscle of longevity of business in a way. So if you are true to that strategy and purpose, you're gonna communicate it to those brilliant talents out there. They are there. They haven't left, but they just pulled out and observing. They can allow to do that in these circumstances because this factor that was holding them back was so-called job security or financial security, which after the last 2 years, even in the first world countries, you would imagine that security is a very relative term, right? And people reimagined what's security for them. And they would think like, I'm going to join this company because this company is not looking just to gain short-term, mid-term profits in the next 5 years. Like you say, they're looking after decades of time to deliver this and that value, and the methods and the processes to deliver that may change. But I'm really buying into that idea. This is gonna be a very important thing for hiring, engaging, whether it's contractors, consultants, or full-time employees or hybrid. And ways of working is the second probably around that, how you actually shape it up. That's going to be the second one. I truly believe it's about purpose and ways of working in the next 5 years, engaging people.
I love it. So we finish where we start, which is effectively the why.
Yeah, this is what we do. We're consistent, right? We
You're
don't lose
correct.
our course.
Yeah, I love, and I suppose the why is the one element, and then as you said, what's nice about this conversation is the first part, it starts with the why, and then it's how do you then create the structure internally or the strategy internally, the strategy and the structure, I suppose, to allow people to, I suppose, empower people to realize their own potential, because I said in any organization, you've got the three different kinds of people where you've got the absolute standouts, you've got the consistent performers, and then you've got the people that sort of, maybe in the sort of bottom tier where they've sort of, mentally checked out or whatever it may be. And it's like it's always that cycle of looking for new talent to come in, but also making sure existing talent has that framework to grow as well.
Absolutely. And we started with why, we ended up with why. And that's a big discussion. I truly believe in the generation of infinite-minded leaders. They would create some amazing company like Wholesale Investor or similar, and they would leave this world and this whole idea about making things in what and how easier for their customers and for the people who work for that business and company improved, and the mindset of continuous process innovation and better relationship for human inside of the organization and externally with customers. And plus, technology will always serve us in the way we want. So let's fix us first, and technology will follow. And we have lots of capabilities out there.
I love it. Perfect way to finish. Eugene, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed the session.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Cheers.